We are happy to have with us Daniel Giles, correct? Okay, good. Daniel is joining us from GS1 Asia Pacific, where he is the Senior Manager of International Public Policy. If you are not familiar with them, you probably actually are. They are behind all the barcodes on all of our products. He works in Singapore now, but has also worked in Tokyo, in Doha. And so he is going to be talking to us today about digital trade and digital transformation, which is affecting all of us. So I'm sure you'll have lots of good questions for Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm going to have to start with an apology because you may notice that my voice is a little bit hoarse. So please bear with me as we get through this. But first of all, I'd like to thank MPF and also Hinrich Foundation for the invitation to be part of this important session that you guys have all joined. And I think having for GS1 to have exposure to, up and coming journalists across Asia Pacific is very much a positive for us. And what I'd like to start with today, because in many rooms in which I speak, not everyone is aware of what GS1 is, who we are, and what we do. So I'll spend a couple of minutes just introducing GS1. And then I'll talk a little bit about the digital transformation occurring within our organization, and then talk more about digitalization of trade more broadly, why it's important, what it is, and why I think it's valuable to ensuring the growth of sustainable trade moving into the latter part of the 21st century. Okay. So GS1 is a global standards organization that helps companies do business across the world. So we're a global federated community of national chapters that we call member organizations. So there are 116 GS1 MOs in most of the countries in the world, as you can see, 116. And we serve over 2 million companies. So we are a neutral and not for profit. So we are governed by industry. We exist because of industry coming together to try to make standards-based solutions for problems that they're finding in doing business. We are global and local in the sense that the organization I work for is called GS1 Global Office, which, if you like, sort of sits above all of the member organizations, but we also report to them. So while we work on global strategy, the strategy is delivered on the ground in the 116 markets and economies where we are present. And we serve over 25 industries. Most notably will be the retail sector and the healthcare sector, but we're also active in logistics and many others besides. So, and one of the main bywords for GS1 is collaboration and interoperability. We kind of sit in the nexus between government, industry, civil society, and try to convene industry to come together to work with government to find solutions that are in the interests of companies, but also in the broader interests of countries as they work through their trade journey. So at a very base level, what do GS1 standards do? They create a common language so that different actors across a value chain can talk to each other in a way that is efficient and allows for the smooth movement of goods and services. So we identify, capture, and share. We uniquely identify products, locations, and assets. We then accurately capture data about those those things, and we provide an easy way to share that information consistently with trading partners, but also with governments and even with consumers and patients. The last thing on GS1, but I think it's important, how do we set these standards? Again, this is part of the collaborative nature of GS1. Companies will be facing similar problems, and they work with GS1, they come together, we provide a convening power, that they come together and share information and work out the best ways to meet these problems. So together we create the standards, and then we develop tools for adoption so that these standards can be scaled at ideally low cost or no cost across the sectors that they're relevant for. So as Anne mentioned, this is the most famous standard, I think. When I was consulting for Google, one of the lines they used to like to say was, 6 billion times a day someone will search on Google. Well, it's around 10 billion times a day that it goes beep. So the barcode is the most used global data standard available. And 50 years ago, before the barcode, I think most of us are probably too young to remember that time, but it really did change the way businesses were able to operate, create efficiencies, and not least in the supermarket, make the queues at the checkout a little bit shorter. But this is the first kind of, because it's 50 years old, this is the first sort of digitalization of trade, the linear barcode. But increasingly what you're going to see moving forward, and already in some markets or in some sectors you see this, is the transition from the linear barcode to the QR code or 2D barcode powered by GS1. So I think we're all familiar with QR codes generally, certainly since COVID. You scan a QR code in a restaurant, it takes you to somewhere on the internet where you can read the menu or you can order, something like that. So what the QR code powered by GS1 allows for is all of the information about the product that is captured in the linear barcode. This will be in the QR code. However, what the QR code allows for is smartphones, but many other machines as well, to have a digital twin of the product information on the internet. So with a linear barcode, the product information is static. Once it's on the label, you know what product it is, maybe the weight, certain attributes about the product, but there's so much more information that can be encoded in a QR code powered by GS1. And so using other standards like GS1 Digital Link and our registries platform, a consumer such as the lady in the picture there can scan a product and immediately learn information such as ingredients or allergen information, increasingly learn about the sustainability journey that that product has been on, and many other things besides. And obviously you can imagine consumer goods companies are very keen on this because they can create all kinds of consumer engagement around that scan of the 2D code. But I think what's very important here is that in a decentralized multipolar world, having common global standards becomes more important, not less. And this is something that GS1 allows for through the QR code. So moving on to digitalization of trade. And I know you guys have been sat in various sessions all week, and have not come to this without your own experience. But I think it's probably good to just set out what digitalization of trade generally means. So this is an OECD definition. There are others, but I think this one captures it nicely. Digitalization of trade is the trade in products and services enabled by electronic means. It is digitally enabled transactions of trading goods and services that can either be digitally or physically delivered, and that involve consumers, firms, and governments. And that is while all forms of digital trade are enabled by digital technologies, not all digital trade is digitally delivered. So this is what I referred to before about having potentially a digital twin of a product online and having that dynamic information about it to make, for a consumer, give a greater confidence in the provenance of a product, to understand a lot more about it. And for businesses, this creates greater speed and efficiency and lowers barriers for SMEs to get involved in global trade, because utilizing global standards with technologies that already exist, that people are largely using already, means that the barrier to entry is much less than it would be previously. And for governments, of course, it provides better risk management, more accurate tax collection, the ability to counter corruption, and quicker interventions in crises. So again, if there's a digital twin of products moving around the world, then, for example, if there's some kind of issue with contamination of food products, that information can be uploaded to the internet, attached to the batches of those products. So when it goes beep at the checkout, it can be taken out of the supply chain at the earliest point. Obviously, with a static barcode, that's not possible. So again, digitalization of trade, everyone's talking about it. We see here a number of publications that have come out in the last couple of years, some from intergovernmental organizations and one from the Asian Development Bank. But the G20 last year in New Delhi created their high-level principles for digitalization of trade documents that was part of the Leaders' Declaration. APEC is continually looking at ways to create rules that facilitate digitalization of trade processes. And the ADB, which has a major, obviously, development imperative, particularly for less developed countries, to ensure that SMEs and companies in less developed markets are not excluded from international trade. And the argument that they make is digitalization of trade can assist with ensuring that that doesn't happen. Again, in summary, digitalization of trade allows for a number of benefits that paper-based trade simply doesn't. It obviously creates a lot of efficiencies and lowers costs for companies. It allows the ability to create much more transparency and traceability in a product's journey or development as it's been produced, particularly if it's made of several different components. And increasingly what we're seeing is governments demanding a lot more information, a lot more data about products that come into their market. In places like the EU, which we'll talk about in a minute, with the European Union Digital Product Passport, there's a much greater demand for specific data about products, otherwise they will eventually be barred from access to the European market. In the US, there is the Food Safety Modernization Act, Final Rule 204, which demands, again, the digital exchange of data about certain food products to allow them continued access to the US market. So this speaks a little bit again to the importance for everybody of the digitalization of trade, because even if you are not in the EU, or you're a company that isn't in the EU or the US, chances are you or one of your trading partners is exporting to those major export markets. And regulation that is being developed that demands more digital access to information about products is happening, is being passed, and is coming online in the next few years. So companies, even in the Asia Pacific, that maybe don't even touch the US or the EU physically, are still impacted by this digitalization drive. Certainly, with trying to create a more circular economy, digital exchange of information allows, and dynamic data that's live, allows for much easier reconfiguring of products, or reusing of products, and breaking down of products, and repurposing products. This is all facilitated, again, but much easier by the digital exchange of information about those products. So we're seeing major push from industry, and this is why GS1 is so interested in the digitalization of trade, is because there's certain aspects of product data information that's captured digitally that is being pushed by major trade associations in a number of sectors, as well as some of the biggest companies in the world, again, in the sectors that we operate. So what you see here is just one example. This is actually about the apparel sector. There was an open letter to regulators around the world asking for the ability to encode information about apparel products in digital form. And you'll notice, I think, when you take off your t-shirts or shirts tonight, there'll be several pieces of tape in different languages giving you information about how to take care of the product, what it's made of, where it was made, etc., etc., etc. This can all be now easily encaptured and live on the internet through a QR code. And as we see here, annually, regulations which demand labels on products, physical labels, generate 9.2 million kilometers of label tape, which if you put all that in a line, apparently it's 12 return trips to the moon. And digital QR would eliminate 343,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions every year, just by eliminating that part of the production. So we're working with many of the industry associations from all around the world that are listed here, but there are also, similarly in the food sector and other sectors, initiatives and position papers coming out pretty much every month to provide recommendations to government on how to design rules that will facilitate the digitalization of trade. And government itself is already moving in this direction, and actually can be an incredible facilitator of encouraging industry action as well, to become more sustainable, to push industry to embrace digitalization in their business practices. There's a number of bills there that are either already passed or in the process of being so, from primarily the European Union, but also the United States, that have various different aims. But the point is that whether it's for circularity, whether it's for transparency, whether it's for visibility across the supply chain, or whether it's for safety, it's much easier to electronically exchange data to meet these requirements than it would be for physical labels or paper-based processes in cross-border trade. And indeed, there's a number of free trade agreements and frameworks being developed by governments in this region and around the world to think about the most appropriate and the best way to develop the rules for this push into trade digitalization. But the regulation is turning nice to have into must have. If you want to be able to get into some of these export markets, you will need to be able to provide this information to regulators sooner or later, but it's coming. So we do see a real confluence of trends driving this change and facilitating trade digitalization. Regulation is a major one, and we've seen some of the laws that are actually pushing this already. But then increasingly, consumers have greater expectations about the products they buy. They want to know more information about where it's come from, how it was made, and indeed, how healthy is it for you? All of these things can be more easily explained through digital labels. And there are strong business applications, as I mentioned before, consumer goods companies and many other industries see great value through consumer engagement, through digital labels, but also finding efficiencies. If you have greater visibility in your supply chain, you have more data, you can analyze it and make changes to make your production processes more efficient, quicker, manage stock, etc., etc. So, as I say, there are many areas where these conversations are taking place. Intergovernmental organizations like UNCFACT, where GS1 is very active. We've worked with think tanks like, and thanks to our hosts here, the Hinrich Foundation, where we put out a co-commissioned piece of original research last year that looked at the impact of extraterritorial regulations on businesses in Asia and how they might equip themselves to address these challenges, and indeed how government might be able to support that. And also, we're working with other convening organizations like the Asian Development Bank to develop pilots and try to develop frameworks that can be scaled, particularly in support of SMEs and companies in developing economies and less developed markets. This is obviously a huge issue, and SMEs make up 90% of our members. But our members also include the biggest companies in the world: Procter & Gamble, Unilever, people like Pepsi, Coca-Cola. But 90% of our members are SMEs. So we also see, and they're also the backbone of most economies. So if we can bring more SMEs into international trade, find more markets, grow their businesses, that should be to everyone's benefit. But the point here is that advancing this digital transformation is not the responsibility of one stakeholder group. It requires real collaboration and committed collaboration to achieve this change at scale, and to ensure that other groups are not left behind. So we partner with all of these organizations, and this brings in these are intergovernmental organizations and other non-profits and trade associations, but this brings in public sector stakeholders as well as private sector insight and civil society to, again, agree on rules about the future of trade that can be adopted by the most across the value chain. So just a quick example of some of our standards in action, but also a nod to the comment earlier about the need for committed collaboration. On this slide explains a adoption of GS1 standards by China Customs at the border, initially for some certain number of products in cross-border general trade, but eventually in 2023 adopted for all cross-border e-commerce coming into the Chinese market. This has now been mandated by China Customs. But as you can see from the first point there, this has taken over 10 years to make happen. Because there, of course, needs to be a lot of verifying that this works, and there are advantages to making these changes. And my colleagues in GS1 China have highlighted on this slide where we see the benefits for the importer or the broker. The declaration is easy because the GTIN, which is the standard being declared here, that's the global trade item number. That's the number at the bottom of a linear barcode, also encoded in a QR code powered by GS1. The declaration is easy because all of the products, if they're in general modern trade, are utilizing a GTIN. And this improves also efficiency in its warehousing and port procedures. For the online retailer, they have more accuracy in their category management and ability to improve their logistics. And for the consumer, this is about building confidence for consumers that what they're buying is not counterfeit, that what they're buying is legitimate, but also it's a transparent way of showing that this product is you bought from abroad, but it is similar to what you would find locally. And then for China Customs, there's a whole list of positives, which is why that they chose to adopt the GTIN declaration. And this is something that we really feel other countries could well adopt, and harmonization of processes at the border, again, is another way that we feel, you can find efficiencies and make trade more sustainable. The importance is interoperability, and having similar processes allow actors in the value chain to find more markets more quickly. So here's again another example of a partnership that we have taken on with the Asian Development Bank, which was specifically targeted at ensuring market access to the EU for companies in less developed countries in Asia. So we took one supply chain, which was the apparel sector in Sri Lanka, and we looked at this and tried to analyze and develop a framework for using digital labels to capture all the necessary information that the regulators in the EU may require. So this involved full value chain collaboration. So funded by the ADB, but also working with brand owners, their suppliers, trade finance banks, manufacturers, and other NGOs to develop a framework and a prototype that can be scalable and applied across across borders, and across industries. Now, this work is still ongoing, but we've had a very positive interaction with all of these actors, and there's clearly a need and a want amongst all of them to contribute to try to square this circle and develop an easy way to meet constantly evolving regulatory requirements. And so what does the prototype look like right now? Well, to the right there is what you would see on your smartphone if you scanned the white T-shirt that was the product as part of this pilot. So we've created a pretty basic user interface, but basically captured there is all the data about the T-shirt, its size, the company that made it, what it's made out of. But the granular data can also include sustainability certifications and information for regulators that will mean that can also be updated, of course. If regulations change, you can also, because this information is dynamic, you can add further data through the data model developed here to allow continued regulatory compliance. This is not possible, or it's much more difficult through paper-based processes.
I don't want to throw you off your game, but we're about halfway through, so I just wanted to double check and see if there are any questions before we continue. Does anyone have any? Oh, yep. Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Jason Bloomberg. So this is super interesting. And one question I have from a journalistic perspective is we write a lot about trade. We use HS code data, like nationally declared HS code data, to track trade, who's selling what to whom. Is the final goal of this, as you see that, replacing the HS system? Or is this going to, this will be linked in, and then, you'd see a database where you could look at the HS code and then see, well, look at these codes and then see where this fits into that system. And how do you see those things kind of developing in the future?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think linking in is probably the better way to characterize it, because one of the points here is that I think all of us should want to avoid, and GS1 we certainly do, is creating kind of siloed situations where there are certain registries that hold information that you need to update many different registries to have access to certain different markets. The whole point about the digital standards mean that you can interact with lots of different registries through the label and through the internet.
I have one question. I'm Tawhid from Bangladesh. And just to inform that it is illegal from Bangladesh to take money outside without the government's permission. Otherwise, it has been considered as money laundering or capital fly. What we have seen so far in Bangladesh, that it has been saying for last 1 decade actually that with the process of under-voicing or over-invoicing, the corrupt businessmen, the politicians, or other important member of the governments are taking money away from Bangladesh to other tax havens or other, even in Swiss banks, with this kind of trade irregularities. So the government wanted to introduce digital process in the overall trade so that they can monitor the entire system. But then it was seen that this digital system can be manipulated as well. So is there any tool in your mind, any stronger tool in your mind to stop this kind of corruption, because the money was even used in terrorist financing as well? So is there any stronger tool in your mind so that we can stop this in Bangladesh?
So first of all, I think e-invoicing is obviously a lot stronger deterrent for corruption than paper-based, because that's wide open for manipulation. And I think the digital invoice makes that more difficult. However, in terms of, I think what you're asking, there are technologies that are being developed, like verifiable credentials and things like that, that will make it much more difficult for the kind of corruption that you've mentioned there to happen. But to be honest, in terms of transfer of payments, that's also an area that's really not GS1 is not involved in that. There are other standards organizations that develop standards for payments.
Hi, this is Yan Li from Taiwan, reporting for Bloomberg. It seems that the digitalization of trade is mainly for facilitating international trade. But do you think that all the measures that you just mentioned is probably helpful for the implementation of trade sanctions or export control? Thank you.
Yes, I think if you have access, much easier access to information about trade flows and how supply chains work, and you have live visibility of these through the internet, which is basically what all this is, right? Marrying web technologies with international global data standards. And then there are various organizations and companies that can support governments developing much more, creating a lot more value in terms of developing solutions that can allow for greater visibility to implement trade sanctions. But yeah, I don't have much to add to that.
Bonnie from the Standard, Hong Kong. Yes, actually, I was wondering if all this have addressed the scope 1, 2, 3 carbon emission issue for supply chain, and also does it address the cross-border CNBM? Yeah.
Yeah, very good question. So this is obviously something that this is why this work is still ongoing to work out is scope 1 and scope 2, but scope 3 is extremely is obviously extremely challenging, I think, for everybody. You'll notice I didn't mention them, but we're also working with the IFRS, which is, many of you may know, is the sort of de facto accounting reporting organization, and they've just, you may be aware, they created their first sustainability standards, ISSB S1 and S2 last year. But of course, the technical business of integrating sort of financial reporting with product data information in a data model that can be applied easily and at scale is a major challenge, and one we're continuing to work through with the ADB and the other stakeholders at the moment. Realizing digitalization trade is possible, and as I think hopefully we've seen, there are many different fora where many different stakeholders are coming together at various levels and in various geographies to try to align on rules to facilitate this. Obviously, technology and the rapid spread of internet penetration around the world, and importantly, mobile penetration, particularly in developing markets, is making this easier. But what's very important is that interoperability has to be key, because if we create different rules in different places, then it makes it much more expensive to move things around. This is just inevitable. So having a low barrier to adoption for companies across the world is very important. And as far as is possible, taking into account political considerations and potential, rivalries, at least having a baseline of interoperability is crucial. So I think what's also the case here is that many of the standards that can facilitate digital trade, they do exist. The technologies do exist that are already utilized by people all around the world. So there's not much that needs inventing. It's about coming together and collaborating, and then educating people across the value chain, actors across the value chain, and helping them drive adoption. And that's partially through education. It could be partially through government incentives. It could be partially through brand owners or people towards the top of the supply chain, sort of ensuring that their suppliers also adopt these processes. But that's really the main issue is education and driving adoption at this point, because the technologies exist. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, which is the good news. But there are a number of challenges that are impeding greater digital transformation of industry and trade. And one of them is that, we must ensure that verifiable transactions that are secure for digital data sharing. So we have to trust the data. If you don't trust the data, then the whole system falls down. And so, again, I know this sounds like I'm banging this drum a lot, but all stakeholders really do need to come together. And there's a role there for journalists as well when you're covering, issues to do with international trade. Understanding the way that digital transformation can be a positive could be very beneficial. And you guys also have the ability to educate a lot of stakeholders across the value chain through your publications and your work. And indeed, collaboration among governments can avoid duplication of investment. Again, if we create rules that everyone can agree to, at least at a baseline, and then it means that companies don't have to have teams of people to work out exactly how to comply with various rules in different markets. So to the degree we can harmonize those rules, then that's to the benefit of all the companies, and it will also help drive trade growth. So we speak to governments a lot, but we obviously, and we also talk to our members, but we are driven by our members. So our relationship with government is to learn about the issues they're facing and help our companies have a kind of heads up about a forewarning of what government is thinking about. But we also have the opportunity often to engage constructively with government. So, as I mentioned earlier, when we do that, I think the public sector and regulators, to the extent that they can, the harmonization makes things a lot easier. So collaborating with other governments to establish uniform rules will be very beneficial to speeding digitalization of trade and to facilitate seamless information sharing across international supply chains, and the standards can really help with that. They may also look to promote trade digitalization by potentially aligning their legal systems with MLITA, which you may be aware of, is a model law on electronic records, which many governments around the world are doing. And then demonstrate support for replacing paper with digital trade documentation. This is one of the things that's sort of taking the longest time, and there's very good reasons why governments may be reluctant, but you know, demonstrating visible support for trade documentation in digital form will speed digital transformation of trade. And where we sit right now, Singapore is really kind of at the forefront of this promotion of trade of digital trade documentation. Again, if we can align national border procedures with globally interoperable standards, then this will help push the digitalization of trade and very likely grow cross-border trade amongst geographies around the world. And I think the China customs example is a good one of that. They're using international standards that are already in use all over the world to speed their border process and create better risk assessment of products coming into the Chinese market. And then lastly, governments couldn't facilitate digital identity adoption. So advocating for the adoption of digital identities such as the LEI, which is a standard identifying sorry. So LEI, GLN, and GTIN are different standards that identify locations, organizations, and products, and establishing mutual recognition or interoperability guarantees with national digital identity standards to streamline processes. So in many countries, there are local digital identity standards, but aligning those with things that are digital identity standards that are adopted globally will streamline processes and again bring greater efficiency. And then for the private sector, obviously investing in digital processes and digital infrastructure is important. But also standardizing the way that they exchange data across their infrastructure can help create seamless communication amongst all actors in the value chain. And again, embracing a mindset of digital first in companies is something that will create a speedier transition of digital trade, and SMEs particularly need help with this. But again, there are technologies that they are already using and standards that they use that means that partners of theirs, maybe larger companies or governments, can support SMEs to build their digital skill set and more quickly find international markets to grow their businesses. And then last point is very important, is particularly if you're talking to banks, there's a huge trade finance gap, particularly in this part of the world, where companies may find it very difficult to find trade finance. And if we can find a way to digitalize trade finance procedures, that's in the interest of the banks because they're able to more quickly provide that trade finance to more parties, but also it will allow companies to leverage that trade finance to find more markets and to grow their businesses as well. And I think one of the last points that I'd make, okay, we lost that, is that all of these major issues that I think are like this can be quite esoteric and quite technical when we talk about trade digitalization. But the big major public policy issues that all of us are trying to address, our governments and journalists and individuals in the population, in terms of how can we build a more circular economy, how can we create more sustainable future, how can we ensure supply chain resilience for things like food when we have crises, be it major wars or major pandemics. All of these questions partially are going to be answered by having better access to more data. Without the data, it becomes very difficult to make quick changes to address these issues. So that's something that we at GS1 look to do by continually promoting our standards, but also working with all of the stakeholders I mentioned, with the governments and with industry, to more easily transfer the information about products, assets, and locations to help governments and industry meet these challenges.
Thank you. Are there any final questions for Daniel?
Could you QR code each and every person in the planet? And would that violate privacy if it were done?
QR code in human beings.
Yes, because you could QR code products.
I mean, technically, you could. You could actually do it, but that's not something that GS1 would be involved in. I think there's quite a lot of laws in quite a lot of places that would not allow that to be the case. That's a question for the governments, I think, more than industry.
Rules and regulations of the digital trade is changing and changing rapidly. Some of them represent taxation, some of them represent controls. Which of these issues are you most concerned about in the development of the GS technology, the GS services? And yes.
I think all of those applications from governments, there are different drivers, and you've talked about a couple there. Be it revenue, tax revenue, making sure you accurately capture all of it, and we don't have slippage. Again, in the EU, it's more about sustainability at the moment. But all of these applications drive digitalization of business processes. So actually, from our point of view, we're neutral, and we don't take a sort of position politically. So in terms of any regulation that sort of quote unquote forces changes towards a digital approach is generally something that is positive from our point of view, because our standards allow for that digital exchange of information. And if it's about a product, obviously there's a lot of other data to do with its value and things like that. That is the responsibility of the brand owner or the broker to accurately identify. What GS1 allows for is simply the exchange of this information up and down the value chain in a very efficient way. So
a follow-on is, how does the blockchain or the development of blockchain impact your business?
5 years ago, I think a lot more than today. I think blockchain, there's potentially great value in the blockchain in various different business applications, but compared to the digital exchange of data using the GS1 system, which is completely open source and interoperable. Building the infrastructure is quite expensive, and we don't see that at the moment, at least, that blockchain for the scale of the GS1 standards are adopted across the whole economy is not. We don't see that it's particularly tenable. Obviously, there are specific areas and specific parts of the economy where perhaps the blockchain can be extremely valuable, but we do not. We're not heavily involved in blockchain technologies at GS1. The solution providers that leverage our standards may be creating those for specific applications.
Different countries are now planning to introduce central bank digital currencies of their own to facilitate the inter-digital trade system. Do you support this kind of introductions? And if it is introduced, do you think this is going to ease the entire process of digital trade?
Again, we don't take a position on specific policies. I think anything encouraging secure digital transactions will likely speed the digital transformation of trade. But in terms of specific national digital currencies, again, that's just not a sector that banking and payments is just not a sector that GS1 is involved in.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I hope that you have a chance to rest your voice now. We appreciate you powering through.
Appreciate you putting up with the strained accent. Thank you.